Hello everyone, I'm Ahmed Najm. Tonight on Unframed, a conversation I believe is unlike anything you have seen on this subject because it's happening from here, not from a newsroom removed from the reality, but from this region, from Iraq, from Kurdistan, from the ground that absorbs the impact every time a decision is made thousands of miles away. Our guest was the director of the United States National Counterterrorism Center until 2 weeks ago, the highest ranking official to resign from the Trump administration over the war in Iran, a retired Green Beret with 11 combat deployments, a former CIA paramilitary officer, a Gold Star husband who lost his wife Shannon in Syria in the fight against ISIS. His name is Joe Kent, and tonight he speaks to this region, not about it. Joe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Before we get to policy, I want to share something personal. Your wife Shannon was killed in Manbij in Rojava fighting ISIS. My brother Cameron, a photojournalist, disappeared in 2014 while covering clashes between Peshmerga and ISIS. He was wounded. He's still missing to this day. We lost people we love to the same war, in the same region. Now that region is burning again, not because of ISIS this time, because of decisions being made in capitals far away from us. When you look at the Middle East today, what goes through your mind?
First off, I'm very sorry for your loss as well. I've always felt a great connection to the people of Kurdistan just because we fought for so long together, side by side, throughout the years. Right now, I think what has fallen upon the Middle East, upon the region, is a great tragedy, and it's a tragedy that we should have known better. We lived through the war in Iraq, we lived through the war in Syria, Yemen, Libya, so much we've gone through over the last few decades because of mistakes that were made, because of lies that were told. And so to see us fall again into this state of war that was completely preventable, I believe is a great mistake. And I'm working right now as hard as I possibly can from outside the government to try to bring an end to this war and hopefully to prevent us from going deeper and deeper into a conflict in Iran that will have even more effects than it's having right now.
Your resignation letter states, I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. I want to understand the American decision-making process. How does the strongest country on earth decide to go to war? Can you walk us through what that process looked like? And at what point did you realize where it was all heading?
Well, unfortunately, there is the way that it actually unfolded, which is how we got to this situation, and there is how it should be. In past wars, even wars where we made mistakes, like the Iraq War, there was a process that we went through where we gathered the intelligence, and intelligence is imperfect, and sometimes it's wrong. But there's usually a period of time where the administration will explain to the American people why we're going to war and attempt to at least get the people to support the war. We saw this in the lead up to the Iraq War, and obviously mistakes can be made. However, in this last iteration, this conflict that we are having right now with Iran, this really didn't take place. Prior to the 12-day war, there was a deliberate decision process that took place in the United States. We attempted to prevent the Israelis from attacking Iran. Once we realized that we couldn't, I believe that we could have tried harder, and I think that we could have prevented the Israelis from attacking Iran. But once they attacked Iran, we did everything that we could to de-escalate. But then we made the decision to strike the Iranian nuclear facilities. But then we made a really quick concerted effort to get back to the negotiating table. And I think this was the right thing to do. The Iranians were on board for more negotiations. Everyone in the region supported more negotiations. But then, unfortunately, what we saw was the president, my president, President Trump, listened to a handful of advisors, and the Israelis did a very effective job of using their senior level officials and then also many of their supporters in the American media to convince President Trump that we couldn't allow Iran to have any kind of enrichment, and also to convince President Trump that Iran posed an imminent threat. And I was working in our intelligence community, and all of our intelligence said that Iran did not pose an imminent threat. They had no intention of actually attacking us. What we had seen over the course of the last year from the Iranians was a very deliberate process in terms of using force. When President Trump came back into office, they stopped the militias, they stopped their proxies from attacking us because they wanted to get to the negotiating table. After the 12-day war and Midnight Hammer, the Iranians fired back an equal amount of missiles as we dropped bombs on their facilities and then signaled to us that that was it. So I didn't see the justification for us launching a war. And as a matter of fact, my president, our secretary of state, all came out right after the war started, and they said very plainly that we attacked Iran because the Israelis were going to attack Iran, and we knew that that would mean that the Iranians would retaliate against us. So the only thing that was actually imminent was the Israelis conducting an attack. And from my perspective, for how much that we support the Israelis and how much we give the Israelis, it was wrong for them, the Israeli government, a foreign government, to decide when my country goes to war.
You have said you believe there was a path to diplomacy that was abandoned. Before the war started, what was the diplomatic option that you believed could have worked?
Yeah, so prior to the former supreme leader of Iran being killed, both the supreme leader of Iran and President Trump both agreed on a starting premise for negotiations, and that was that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. President Trump had said this for a very long time. He said Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That was his stated policy. The former supreme leader in Iran had a religious decree, a fatwa, that said Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon, and he enforced that strictly from 2004 until he was killed just about a month ago, that Iran would not have a nuclear weapon. So what the Iranians wanted was they wanted the ability to enrich some uranium, but they didn't want to actually create a nuclear weapon. So this created the ability for President Trump and the Iranians to go to the negotiating table as a starting point. And there was several series of negotiations between us and the Iranians that we're discussing the details of what the enrichment would look like, to what percentage, how it would be monitored, and these were very pragmatic and ongoing discussions because we agreed on the main premise. So I strongly believe that there was a deal that was within reach prior to the 12-day war. And then considering the fact that the Iranians, even during the 12-day war, when they knew that we were assisting the Israelis, they still didn't attack us. They didn't attack us until we struck the nuclear facilities. And then, as I said, they fired back an equal number of rockets that we dropped bombs on the nuclear facilities. They fired them at an empty sector of a base in Qatar. And then they immediately said that they wanted to get back to the negotiating table. And they did. And we were still talking details about, enrichment levels and things like that. But it was clear based on the Iranians' actions that they wanted a deal. President Trump wanted a deal. But this was a threat to what the Israelis wanted. The Israelis wanted to take down the regime. They wanted this war, and they knew they couldn't do it alone. So they used their access to our senior level officials and their allies in the media and in the American Congress to lobby President Trump for this war, and then ultimately force our hand into this war, destroying the diplomatic process.
Joe, you have described what you call an echo chamber around President Trump. From this region, we have seen wars start exactly like this. Small circles, closed doors, limited voices. But when the missiles fly, they don't land in Washington. They land here in Iraq, Kurdistan, the Gulf states, the Strait of Hormuz, the global oil supply. Entire economies and populations are at the stake. Given your proximity to the decision-making process, were any of these countries even part of the conversation? Or was this purely about America and Iran, and everyone in between was just a map on the table?
Unfortunately, there a lot of the second and third order effects and the effect it would have on our allies in the region just it wasn't taken into consideration. There was a lot of people within the government who were saying, "Hey, we need to consider what's taking place with the GCC countries." The reason why we've never gone to Iran up to this point is because of the Straits of Hormuz, and it doesn't take very much at all for the Iranians to choke off the Straits of Hormuz. All the security guarantees that we provide to the GCC, to Iraq, to the Kurdistan region, there will be a massive effect there. However, unfortunately, the echo chamber chamber that surrounded President Trump following the 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer, they isolated him from a lot of this. And I know he was probably still hearing from a lot of people in the GCC, but the loudest voices in his ear, it was the Israeli lobby. It was the pro-Israeli members of the media, but then also senior level Israeli officials engaging directly with our senior level officials, who basically made this war all about a threat that Iran posed, which quite frankly wasn't there. That's why they had to go around the intelligence channels to go directly to the president. And they really sold the president a fake idea, or an illusion of an easy equation. They said to the president that, hey, look, the Iranian people are already out on the streets resisting. Look how successful Midnight Hammer was. It was an amazing thing that we flew our jets over there and were able to bomb the targets and, had our guys home by dinner the next day. It was an amazing thing our military did in Venezuela. They could go in, they could grab the president, no American casualties, minus some folks who were wounded. And, our military can pull this off and it will be very historic for you. So those decisions were made in an echo chamber. However, the rest of us said, hey, this is going to have major implications throughout the region. And unfortunately, we weren't listened to, and we are where we are right now because of that.
That's unfortunate. On breaking points, you described reaching a point where you felt you had exhausted every options from the inside. Was there a single moment, a briefing, a conversation, a decision where it became clear to you that this war was already a done deal? And among the people close to the process, was anyone still arguing against it, or had those voices already been shut out?
Once the war started, we worked. I was about 2 weeks into the war before I resigned. We worked pretty diligently, myself and others worked pretty diligently to provide the president with some potential ways to just basically say, hey, these were limited strikes, and now we're going to get back to the negotiating table. Frankly, those options, I don't believe, ever truly reached the president, again, because of the way the echo chamber was sheltering the president. I hope now, considering how poorly the war is going and the cost that it is inflicting on our allies and even back at home on our economy, that he does take a look outside that echo chamber. But unfortunately, it took me, probably about a week to 10 days to realize that even some of the options that we were coming up with, at my level, they really weren't leaving the room, unfortunately, the room that I was in, which was very frustrating. And that's why I felt like I needed to resign in order to actually have these ideas and these objections heard publicly. But then also, once the body bags started coming back and we started losing more soldiers, I thought to myself, hey, if more officials had spoken out in the early phases of the Iraq war, we may have averted major tragedies in Iraq, throughout the region. ISIS may never have even happened. The war in Syria may never have happened. So I felt that it was necessary to start speaking out early and not wait for this to get even worse.
Regarding boots on the ground, just days ago, you warned that President Trump would face immense pressure to commit ground troops. Since then, the president has signaled that military campaign will continue and expand. Meanwhile, there are proposals being floated, seizing Khark Island, inserting special operation forces that you yourself have called disastrous. As someone who spent 2 decades on the ground in this region, if American boots into Iranian soil, what happens next? Not politically, militarily, what does the day after look like?
So I frankly think the Iranians are very smart, and they've been watching Americans fight now for well over 20 years, in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So they understand how we're going to behave. The Iranians up to this point have surprised us with their capability, their ability to not meet us head on the battlefield, and really to exploit a lot of the gaps. They're using drones, they're using ballistic missiles, mining. We know they're very efficient at asymmetric, irregular warfare with the Quds Force. So I fear that the Iranians would let us land on whatever patch of ground it may be, whether it's one of the islands or whether it's further inside of Iran. I think they would let us come in, and they would let us get comfortable and say that, hey, we just did the successful military operation, maybe we can do more. And around the time that we would be looking to get our troops out, I think the Iranians would barrage our forces with drones and ballistic missiles, essentially trapping them, keeping them as hostages without ever having to have an Iranian touch an American physically. They would shut down the airspace. They've shown us they're capable of doing that. They're unfortunately showing us it appears that they can take down American fighter jets. As I was waiting to come on your program, it looks like there's an American fighter jet that was just shot down inside of Iran. So they have this capability, and they also know that if they can make us start inflicting casualties, that our first reaction will be to commit more forces, because then we'll say back to our people that, hey, we have to keep fighting because we've already lost so much. President Trump invoked the names of the 13 that had already been killed in his speech just 2 nights ago, saying we have to finish the mission for them. This is kind of the American spirit. So then we'll commit more, which is basically the gambler's fallacy. But then after a while, we will get tired of losing soldiers over there, and we will withdraw as we have before in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that this would play right into the Iranians' hands, and it would make the war go on even longer. It would do nothing to open the Straits of Hormuz or bring peace to the region. So to me, a big threat is actually President Trump listening again to that echo chamber and deciding to commit troops to the ground in an effort to end the war faster. And again, look, this only plays into the Israelis' hands because the Israelis need us committed to this military campaign to take down the Iranian regime because they can't do it on their own. So the Israelis are pushing for our boots to be on the ground in a very serious way. And I hope President Trump realizes that and starts listening to other people outside the echo chamber.
Joe, we live in an interesting place. I need you to understand something about where I'm speaking from. Right now, Iraq is being hit from every direction. US and Israeli forces striking targets on Iraqi soil. Iran launching missiles and drones into the Kurdistan region. Armed factions attacking US installations and civilians caught in the middle of all of it. No other country in the world is observing this from this many sides. As someone who held the highest counterterrorism post in the United States, based on your understanding, how does Washington see Iraq? An ally, a base, a battlefield?
Well, unfortunately, right now Iraq is caught in the middle. I think we've fought very, very hard in Iraq. We lost nearly 5,000 soldiers there. We spent nearly 6 trillion. We had to go back in and fight against ISIS. So we've been through this ups and downs with the Iraqi government. And I feel before this war started, we were in a very good place with the Iraqi government. We had good relationships with the Iraqi military. We had great relationships, obviously, with the Kurdish government. I think in terms of counterterrorism partnership, the Iraqis really stepped up to the plate when it was time for us to get the ISIS detainees, nearly 6,000 ISIS detainees, the worst of the worst, out of Syria as the situation in Syria deteriorated. The Iraqi government stepped up in a very meaningful way and helped us with that very complicated operation to take the ISIS detainees out. That was the last time I was actually in both Baghdad and in Kurdistan, was to help with that operation. So I thought we were on a really good trajectory, a good path with the Iraqi government in terms of being a true partner in the region for stability after all these years of going through all the rough spots we went through. Now, unfortunately, this round of the conflict, we've now started going after members of the PMF. We've started bombing campaigns. We've been hit by members of the PMF. So now we're back into this tit for tat constant warfare again. And so just when Iraq was starting to get back on its feet and potentially be a good counterterrorism partner and have some stability in the region, I was very impressed the last time I was in both Erbil and in Baghdad, just the amount of growth and how normal things were starting to feel once more. But now we're back into this cycle of war and chaos once again, and it's unfortunately going to put us in a bad spot. I know most members of the Iraqi government and most certainly the Kurdish government want to be strong partners with America, but this situation is making things much more difficult, and I fear that it will set back those relations by several years.
That's the kind of clarity this region rarely hears from Washington, and that's exactly why conversations like this matter. You might be aware that reports surfaced that thousands of Kurdish fighters were being prepared for a ground operation inside Iran with US backing. Bafel Talabani, the president of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, was among the first to state that Kurdistan should be a bridge, not a battlefield, and that Kurds being the tip of the spear is not the way to go. What's your opinion on his statement, and what's the best role Kurdistan should take in this situation?
I think Bafo Talabani summed it up very, very well. That the stability that has always been found in the Iraqi Kurdish regions should remain. It should remain as a very stable region, a place where people can go and meet and actually engage in diplomacy. Who knows? Maybe sometime in the future we can sit down with the Iranians in Erbil or Solmania and work this thing out without firing rockets at each other. So I would agree the stability that we have in the Iraqi Kurdish region, it's been hard fought to get that stability. I mean, this is decades in the making. So I don't think attempting to stand up a Kurdish proxy force and take it into Iran. Number one, I don't think it's a viable military option. I don't think there's enough. Just the math doesn't work. There's not enough Kurdish fighters, even if they wanted to, inside of Iran to meaningfully take out any part of the Iranian regime. So I think introducing that instability would actually work against everyone's strategic goals. So again, I think the stability that we have in the Iraqi Kurdish region should be maintained.
Very clear. And the Telegraph recently reported on how Bafel and Quba Talabani, the British race brothers who lead the PUK, worked behind the scene to keep the Kurds from being pulled into the Iran war. Joe, from your experience in the region, how critical was it that the Kurds stayed out of this conflict? And do you think that their neutrality holds if this war drags on?
I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, I think having people who can help us bridge between the Iranians and all the other regional players, for that matter, quite frankly, I think is going to be critical. So I think between what the Talabani brothers have done, what's been done on the Barzani side as well, I think that's all going to be very, very key going forward. That we have people up there that we can trust, that we have great long-standing relationships with, that understand how we think and also understand how the Iranians think, how the Iraqi government in Baghdad thinks. I think that's invaluable, and I think we're going to need as many people that can help us bridge that gap going forward in the future as possible.
Joe, let's shed the light on Syria and Rojava. You have talked about how the US handed Syria to a man you described as a former Al Qaeda operative. But there's another side to that story. The Kurds of Rojava sacrificed thousands of lives in the fight against ISIS and built a self-governing region from the ground up. Today, that region is being integrated into the Syrian state run by the same man. The SDF agreed to the deal. The integration is underway, but there are still no constitutional guarantees for Kurdish rights, no formal recognition of their language, and no certainty about what they actually get to keep. Do you believe the Kurds of Rojava got a fair deal?
Um, you know, I think if the agreement holds and they're able to get what they were promised in terms of integration and being able to have some degree of decentralized governance in the Kurdish regions, I think it was a realistic deal in terms of how much the Syrian Kurds fought against ISIS. I don't know if it'll ever be a fair deal, to be frank with you. I mean, the Kurdish people of that region paid a significant price. They fought very hard. They were the ones who helped us beat back and defeat the ISIS caliphate. So I'm not sure if fair is even possible to do. I think the deal, as long as it can be implemented and held, and as long as the international community holds the new government in Syria to that standard, ensures there's integration, ensures that those Kurdish units get to actually, keep their autonomy, and keep control of that Kurdish region. I think that is probably about as good as we can do at this juncture. And I pray for stability in that region. I've always been kind of skeptical of Shara, considering his past and also just considering my time in the region. But he has a very hard road ahead of him. He's stuck between Turkey. He's stuck between Israel. We just had the Al Hol camp basically disintegrate back into Syria somewhere. Same thing with Al Roj, the other camp. So there's a lot of, I think, potential rough spots ahead. So I do believe that the Al Shara government is also going to need the SDF to integrate, to help them with that stability. So I hope that I hope there can be stability in the years ahead for Syria, but also for the Rojava region as well.
When it comes to America's allies, the Gulf states are America's strongest economic allies in the region. They host US bases, they stabilize energy markets, they have aligned with Washington for decades. And right now, their shipping lanes are disrupted. Their economies are taking direct hits. Oil prices are swinging, and the US couldn't shield them from any of it. From what you have described about how decisions were made, does this war risk breaking an alliance that took 50 years to build?
Most certainly does. I wish I could say it didn't. But our agreement with the Gulf states has always been fairly simple that we provide their security, and they give us good deals on energy. They house our bases. They also use the petrodollar. They settle all their transactions with oil in the dollar, which helps us maintain our status as a reserve currency holder. And basically, our entire economy runs on our ability to essentially print money, knowing that everyone uses the dollar. Now that that deal has roughly been broken. I mean, it's very reasonable for the GCC countries to say, like, "Hey, you said you'd defend us, but you you didn't account for all these Iranian drones and ballistic missiles." And so, the security agreement, although I'm sure they would like to say it still exists, it really doesn't. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing from about that very soon from our GCC partners. So again, this is another reason why we've got to end this war as soon as possible. I think key to that is restraining the Israelis, making sure they can't go on the offensive, and then using any and all bridges to the Iranians that we have, to include leaders in the Kurdish regions, to say, let's get to the negotiating table. Let's work out a way that we can reopen the Straits of Hormuz, start rebuilding the region, and come up with a way that we can coexist. Because the continued bloodshed is just not in anyone's interest, in terms of loss of life, of course, first and foremost, but also just in terms of the way that the global economy, global energy markets are currently structured.
Joe, you have said that 2003 Iraq War was a mistake that cost thousands of lives. I was a child during that war. My audience lived through it and through everything that followed: the chaos, the divisions, ISIS, the displacement. Now you are telling us the same pattern is repeating with Iran. What do you say to a generation in this region that's been told three times, now this war will be the last one?
I don't believe it either, and neither should they. We have to keep our guard up, because there are interests that always want to march us off the war. The Middle East is a very wealthy and very critical place, and so it has been the center of all the wars of our lifetimes. And we just have to look at the patterns. I mean, we had very wealthy interests in the military-industrial complex in my country, and the Israeli lobby. The Israeli lobby came in heavily in support of going to war with Iraq in the lead up to that war. Benjamin Netanyahu, as a younger man, helped sell that war to my government. And at the end of the day, this really benefited the Israeli agenda. They wanted to control Iraq so they could eventually use it as a jump off point to go to war with Iran, with Syria at the time when Assad was in charge. And so, again, I think in terms of the getting the Israeli government under control, that has a desire to expand and to bring us off to war as well, basically with all of Israel's neighbors, to include Iraq and to include Iran. We have to put that back in a box. That can't be allowed to dictate how and when we go to war any longer. And I think if our generation, the generation who fought these wars, who's lived through these wars, who've buried our family members because of these wars, we really have to know better. And even when it seems like there is no other chance to solve a problem other than war, I think we have to continue to use diplomatic means to prevent the next war. I think we really owe that to our children, and then to all those who gave their lives throughout the years over the last several decades.
About diplomacy, in your proposed diplomatic path, you mention Oman and Qatar as intermediaries. Iraq shares the longest border with Iran. We have deep economic, cultural, and political ties with Tehran. We also host American forces. Iraq is arguably the country most affected by the outcome of this conflict. Why isn't Iraq central to your proposed diplomatic solution? And do you think Iraq could play a mediating role?
It's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. I think Iraq most certainly could, especially as we've discussed here in the Kurdish regions. I think in some ways, there are elements of the government in Baghdad that are very close with Iran, and I think we can use them to our benefit, to help broker a deal, to broker some form of a ceasefire. I know that's a tight line for basically a lot of the Iraqi Shia politicians to walk as well, but I think we should use that. We have good relationships right now, with a lot of folks that are from the Dawa Party, that are from the Badr Corps. In the lead up to getting the ISIS detainees transferred, I met with Hadi Amari. I met with Qasim Maraji, the national security advisor, and they were very helpful. And I think because of the relationships that they have with the Iranians, they could help bring this to some form of an end. Again, I think right now, in order to end this war, we should have our diplomats engaging on every front: the Omanis, the Qataris, the Iraqis, the Kurdish regions. I think it should be a full court press to figure out what the best way is, to the Iranians, to get them to the table.
Joe, we are hearing contradictory signals. The US says conversations are happening. Iran categorically denies it, calling it psychological warfare intended to manipulate markets. Based on what you have described about how the administration operates, is a diplomatic resolution actually possible at this point, or are we past the point of no return?
We have to get the Israelis under control. As we just saw here in the last 2 days, the Israelis will ensure that anyone that we're negotiating with, in Iran is on the chopping block to be targeted. They've already killed several of the negotiators. They just attempted to kill one of the other negotiators. So this is a major problem, and we've seen this over the course of the last 2 weeks. Anytime President Trump says we're going to stop targeting, civilian infrastructure, energy targets, we immediately see the Israelis start targeting those exact targets that the president said not to target, because we want to get to the negotiating table. So I don't personally think that the Iranians are going to take us seriously until we show that we can contain the Israelis. I think if we could contain the Israelis, I think we could convince, through probably some of the intermediaries that we just discussed. I think we could convince the Iranians that we actually want to get to the negotiating table. Now, I think we're going to have to rethink some things, in terms of the way that we've employed sanctions, against Iranian energy, to get that reintroduced to the market. But I think there is a pathway there for peace, because peace is actually in everyone's benefit at the end of the day, except for the party that wants this war to continue, and that's the Israelis. And that's why I keep saying the first thing the president has to do is restrain the Israelis.
Joe, wait a minute. You have made a claim that stopped me cold. I was about to ask you about some stuff like that, but you said it again. You said that one of the reasons diplomacy cannot move forward transparently is that President Trump cannot publicly reveal who he's communicating with on the Iranian side, because Israel would target them. The most powerful country on earth cannot name its own negotiating partners because its closest ally would eliminate them. Meanwhile, that same ally depends entirely on American weapons, American funding, and American political cover. How is that possible? How does the country supplying the guns not get to decide when to use them?
Said this is why I had to leave the administration to speak about this publicly, because it's absurd. We pay for Israel's existence. Essentially, we pay for their entire defense budget. We've given them the capability to go on the offense, yet we are letting them drive this entire war that we're paying for, that we're losing soldiers in fighting. And the second that we say we want the war to end, we want to use diplomacy, they will target the diplomats that we're negotiating with. This relationship that we have with Israel is completely dysfunctional, and it can't continue this way. I have nothing against the Israeli government. I have nothing against the Israeli people. I respect the fact that they're putting their interests first, which is what countries should do. However, our country should not be led down this path by the Israelis. But we have to fix this relationship, or we will continue to find ourselves in situations like this in the Middle East. And I think it'll be harder and harder for us to get us out of this catastrophic situation that we're in Iran.
That means America genuinely cannot conduct its own foreign policy without fear of an ally sabotaging it. What does that tell us about who's actually directing this war?
Exactly. I mean, Okay. When the war started, we had the president and the secretary of state come out and say that we had to attack because the Israelis are going to attack, and now we can't get to a diplomatic solution because the Israelis are killing the people that we're negotiating with. We can't get to a diplomatic solution because the Israelis keep targeting energy targets that we tell them not to target. So we just have to realize, and this is something that I don't believe that we've done in the U.S. government. We have to realize that the Israelis have much different interests than we do. We may share generally some of the same themes where we say we don't, like terrorism, and we'll help each other fight terrorists. However, in terms of this war in Iran, we've stated a very limited goal. We want to take out their ballistic missile capability, a lot of their military capabilities, and their nuclear capabilities. The Israelis are completely different. They want to take out the entire regime, and they don't have the capability to do it, and they need us engaged. So we have to be realistic of ourselves and say, hey, us and our partner here, our ally, who we're paying for 100%, we have different goals in mind. So when it comes time for us to pursue our goals, which is actually ending this war, basically, I think the summary of President Trump's speech the other night was him saying that, like, look, we've gotten most of what we want to get done. We can be done with this relatively quickly. But the problem is, we can't be done with this until we're honest with ourselves and say the Israelis have a different agenda. They will continue to drag us into this war further. So that's why I keep saying that step one has to be restraining the Israelis.
Joe, since you brought it up, let me ask you something directly. You have described a war that serves Israel's strategic goals, funded by American taxpayers, fought with American lives, launched against what your own agencies assessed was not an imminent threat. You have described a president surrounded by a carefully constructed echo chamber of Israeli officials and media allies. If this is Israel's war and the United States was dragging into it, the question people are asking is so simple. Why? What kind of leverage allows a foreign government to override the stated platform of an American president? Are the Epstein files part of that equation? And is that a conversation anyone in Washington is willing to have?
It's clearly a conversation that people don't want to have. I don't know the exact answer to that, but the more this goes on, and the more that we cover up what's in the Epstein files, I think people are going to come to that conclusion, whether it's accurate or not. So if we want transparency, we want the truth to come out, we should just be transparent about the entire Epstein files, the Epstein network, what we know. In terms of influence, how Israel made this all happen, we have allowed foreign money to enter our political system, and that's the way America works. We have free speech, and so we say that you can spend your money however you want to spend it. This has been exploited by several governments, but I think by Israel probably the most effectively, and they have done a very good job of funding the entire political careers of a ton of our politicians on both sides of the aisle. This gives them access. The Israelis also do a very good job of using their dual citizens who happen to be Americans and Israelis, who come and engage with us and give us some good information. They have a very good intelligence service, give us some good information so that we get very, very comfortable with them. We view them as an ally. And then the way that they're able to influence the media, and they can create that echo chamber. So I think we just have to be very, very honest with ourselves about the amount of Israeli influence there is throughout our entire political media, and really business apparatus around our centers of power in America, and start rooting that out in a way that gives us back sovereignty and control of our own government.
Okay, because from the outside, the pattern looks less like an alliance and more like something no one is allowed to name.
It most certainly does, and from the inside, it feels that way as well. Just how quickly the Israelis were able to move, and the effects that they were allowed to have, essentially. I It's not an alliance. It's nothing normal. It's not an alliance like we have with with the British, for instance, or the French, or anyone in NATO. It's something that is completely different, and essentially we have to end up doing their bidding. And if you say that, then you're criticized and you're called an anti-Semite, etc. And so again, there's a powerful system there that smacks down anyone who speaks out against it. Although I do feel like that is starting to break and fracture, because especially with this war, it's become just so obvious that we were not in control. There was no effort to even sell this war to the American people. You had senior level officials come out and basically say, for the first couple of days, we had to do this because of Israel, which, like as you pointed out, as a non-American, is insane. And so, from an American perspective, even I think a lot of Americans who generally had a favorable view of Israel were like, "What the heck is going on here?" As tragic as the events that are unfolding right now are, and as much as I want them to end, I think the one silver lining from this last month is that people are starting to see where the centers of power actually are and who calls the shots, and people are furious about it. And I think this is going to bring about some real political change in America.
Joe, you have described a system where Israeli government officials set the narrative, pro Israel think tanks amplify it, friendly media outlets broadcast it, and AIPAC ensures that any politicians who questions it gets financially destroyed in their next election. That's not lobbying. That's an infrastructure. From what you witnessed over the past years, how much of America's decision to go to war with Iran was shaped by that infrastructure rather than by actual intelligence?
I think the majority of it was, honestly, as I described, when we came back into this administration over a year ago, the Iranians showed us they wanted to get the negotiating table. President Trump and the supreme leader had a starting point for negotiations. And then from there, we watched the Israelis come in and use that ecosystem of media, their access to our government officials, and then just a lot of sympathetic people in America. They use that very effectively to get us to this point. So, unfortunately, that's just the reality. I wish I could tell you it was something different. We've had a adversarial relationship for quite some time with Iran. But over this last year, the Iranians showed us, and I think a lot of this is because of the policy that President Trump implemented in the first Trump administration. The Iranians showed us that they actually were taking Trump very seriously, and they wanted to get a deal with him. And this is where I think the tragedy is. I mean, President Trump showed in his first administration that if the Iranians pushed him and they killed and they targeted Americans through their proxies, that he would punch them back. He killed Qasem Soleimani, he killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas, but then he didn't take the bait of getting sucked into a disastrous war that would affect the entire region. So he showed that he was tough, but he was also savvy, and I personally think the Iranians really respected that, and so they were willing to get to the negotiating table. But again, because the amount of influence the Israelis had, this wasn't in the Israeli interest, and so they were actually able to change and make it seem like it was in the American interest to launch this war.
And for our audience who may not understand APAC, can you please explain what happens to an American congressman or senator who votes against what APAC wants? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so in America, you can have political action committees that can either donate directly to a candidate, but you're limited on how much money you can give a candidate. It's usually something relatively low, like $6,000. However, a PAC, a political action committee, can support political candidates indirectly by doing ads on their behalf, by putting out door knockers, hiring people. And the amount of money that individuals can give to a political action committee is unlimited. You can give as much money as you want to a political action committee. And so the American Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC, is a very powerful network of wealthy Americans who are supporting the government of Israel. I think many of them are probably dual American Israeli citizens. And AIPAC is, I believe, the most powerful lobbying arm on both the Republican and the Democrat side. And so they can give candidates make or break money. In our Congress, our congressmen get elected every 2 years. So they are in a constant cycle of having to fundraise. I ran for Congress unsuccessfully myself. It takes a lot of money to run a congressional campaign. So these PACs are able to come in and say, hey, we can basically make it so that you don't have to raise any money. We'll do all that for you. We just need you to always vote in support of Israel. And quite frankly, there historically has been a lot of support for the Israeli agenda in America. A lot of Christians, evangelical Christians, feel that they need to support Israel for religious reasons. So APAC has a very deep reach into a lot of our politicians. A lot of our politicians end up, in cabinet positions later on, serving for a Republican or a Democrat or a president, and so then they just end up having this ongoing relationship with APAC, where entire political careers have essentially been funded by this very powerful lobby.
So, is there anyone in Washington today with the political courage to legislate against that? Or has the system made it impossible to even propose it?
Well, in terms of having an independent foreign policy, unfortunately, in the Middle East, the Israelis have been in the driver's seat of our actions in the Middle East for my entire lifetime. And that's just an unfortunate reality. Like all the wars that we have fought, and as damaging as they've been to the region and to America, they have benefited Israel, and they were driven largely by the Israeli lobby. So in the Middle East, we certainly don't have an independent foreign policy. Our military industrial complex, war is big money. So there is a lot of drivers to try to push us into war in other places, like the proxy war we're involved in Ukraine right now. So this is something that I think the younger generations, because we've grown up with these wars, I think we're more aware of than previous generations. So I think that there is a chance in the future here that we will be able to get a more independent foreign policy. And there are a handful that are in government and elected positions who are independent thinkers. And you can see the way that they're treated, how the system goes after them. Thomas Massey is someone who I think is pretty well known as a congressman because of his online presence, but he votes against APAC. He votes very independently. He votes against wars, and I mean, there's millions of dollars every election cycle that are spent against that man. There's others as well that have been out there. Many are in the government right now as well. But the overwhelming majority, unfortunately, will do kind of what they're told by whoever cuts the check for them.
That was a great input, Joe. Thank you. Let's go back to Iran. A military analyst made the point that bombing a country tends to unify it, just as any country would unite under attack. You understand this from your own combat experience. If this war continues on its current path, no clear American objective, an ally with its own agenda driving the escalation, and an Iranian population relying around its government, what is the most likely outcome? And where does that leave the countries caught in between? Iraq, Kurdistan region, the Gulf states, the wider region?
I'm afraid, in terms of Iran, by killing off the moderates, by killing off the former supreme leader, a lot of the hardliners in Iran are going to get more power, because a lot of people may not have been listening to the hardliners before, but they're going to listen to them now, because the hardliners inside of Iran, the more hardline clerics, the IRGC guys, they can easily say to the moderates and the Iranian people, like, look what happens when you try to negotiate with the Americans. I mean, this is what you get. So you need to listen to us, and we basically have no course of action but to fight. And I think we're already seeing a big rally around the flag effect inside of Iran. In January, there were protests out on the streets against the economic conditions in Iran. Everyday Iranians were saying, "Hey, my government is not actually fulfilling the needs that I have," and that's basically what we wanted in America. And in order to basically to mess that up, we went and we attacked that same regime, because I think humans everywhere basically say, "Hey, I'll fight all day long with my own family members, but if an outsider comes in, I'm going to unify with my family members." I use this example in America with a lot of my friends. You know, when President Biden was the president of the United States, there's a lot of people who were part of my political party. We didn't like Biden. We didn't like anything that he did. However, if a foreign government would have attacked us, we would have saddled up and we would have fought on behalf of our country, even if we didn't like Joe Biden. And I think that's pretty much the same everywhere. What I'm afraid is going to happen in the region is that we are going to be set back by 10 to 15 years, and we're going to see increasing fractures in the sectarian conflict that we saw emerge from the Iraqi war. I think, unfortunately, because we're targeting a lot of what we're viewing as Iranian proxies inside of Iraq right now, and I think a lot of that is not accurate. We're going to reignite those sectarian tension points, and I think a lot of members of the Iraqi Shia community are going to say, like, well, hey, I'm with the Iranians. This is going to be a Shia fight against all the people who stand against the Shias, the Americans, the Israelis, and maybe even some of the Sunnis. I hope that's not going to happen, because those were very dark days in Iraq, but it wasn't that long ago. So I fear if we don't get to a quick peace, we are going to see more sectarian warfare. We're going to see a hardening of the most hardline and extreme elements inside of Iran, and that will plunge us into further cycles of more and more violence and bloodshed.
Joe, let me ask you a personal question. You are being investigated by the FBI. Some calls you a traitor, others a hero. In our part of the world, journalists and officials who challenge powerful narratives face consequences every day. Some are jailed, some disappear, like my brother. I'm not comparing systems, but I'm saying that speaking truth at personal cost is something my audience understands deeply. Can I ask what keeps you going?
Really, what keeps me going is everyone buried in Arlington National Cemetery. That's our cemetery here in America where we bury our war fallen. My late wife is there. Hundreds of my friends are there from the war on terror, many from the war in Iraq. And I just remember, over 20 years ago, sitting in Iraq, and I came to the realization I was on my third deployment that we had been lied to get into the war. And I promised myself that if I ever was in a position of power, to stop the next generation from being really brutalized in a war like this, I would do everything I could to speak out about it. And then also just seeing the way that our government was really fooled by the Israelis and our hand was forced, I felt that it was my duty as an American, as a patriot, to speak out about that. So that keeps me going. The memory of all of our fallen, and then really wanting our country to arrive in a better place where we actually have basically our independence back, and we're not getting involved in these catastrophic wars over and over again. That's what keeps me going. Also, have a lot of relationships in the Middle East, in the region, in particular in Iraq and Syria and Kurdistan, and I want nothing but prosperity and peace for that region as well.
Joe, it seems that we are wrapping up and we go to the final question. If you could send one message directly to the people of this region, Iraqis, Kurds, the civilian code in the Middle East of this war and every war before it, what would you say?
I would say that the American people we're not being represented well right now by our government, and we haven't been in the past. We want nothing but peace for the region as well. We want partnership. We hope that you all can enjoy the peace and prosperity that we've been blessed with here in America, and this new generation that's coming up, we want to work towards that piece. And again, we're going to do everything that we can from our end to try and bring about an end to this war, so there can be some stabilization, there can be some normalcy there that I know the people of Kurdistan, Iraq, Syria, and the rest of the region so desperately want and deserve.
Joe, thank you so much for this conversation, for your honesty, and for making things clear for our audience. It matters, really.
Absolutely, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.